Color settings in Photoshop can be a bit of a mystery, but I'm going to try to break it down for you. We need to prepare this image for print. And to start, I'm going to check and see what the color settings are. Under the Edit menu are Color Settings. And the default settings for Photoshop are North America General Purpose. North America General Purpose uses the web or on-screen only standard of sRGB, which is meant to simulate most displays and backed by a lot of large manufacturers. However, for high-end print, that is a lower gamut, and if you are preparing images for high-end print, you should be switching to the North America Prepress 2 settings. When I choose North America Prepress 2, it uses the better standard of Adobe RGB 1998. If I turn Preview off and on, I don't see a big difference right here, but let's take a look at it directly in the image. One other note, it says unsynchronized here. Unsynchronized means that Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and Acrobat are now not all using the same settings. Adobe Bridge will actually allow you to make sure that Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, and Acrobat display color the same, convert color the same, and print color the same. And I'll show you that once you see how these color settings are applied. Really what's happening is this is a color profile that can travel along with the image, and it can change its output based on the device you're printing to, and it can change the display based on what monitor you're looking at the image on. Also very important, and I highly recommend you check with your print shop, is what happens when you go to Image Mode CMYK. In fact, 5 or 10 years ago, most printers would force all the designers to convert the images to CMYK in Photoshop before they came into their page layout program. Well, if you're using Adobe InDesign, and if you use Adobe Bridge to synchronize your color settings, you don't need to do that extra step. You don't need to commit to your 4-color CMYK for a printing press on the individual images in Photoshop. You could leave it in RGB as long as possible, and when you print, InDesign convert to CMYK. Or when you PDF out of InDesign, it can convert to CMYK. Even Acrobat can convert to CMYK for you. And the reason Adobe put in this color managed workflow to let you do the print color space as late as possible in the workflow is so that you could take this image to your website and use it in RGB color space, the color space of your monitor. You could take it to a video, Premiere, or After Effects, and leave it in RGB as long as possible. You could take it to digital printing. This way, everything converts the same, prints the same, and you could keep your images as their most open-ended, widest gamut form. Now I'm going to click OK, and there are 2 choices when you're working with images. Before I show you those 2, I'm going to bring up Window and Info. The Info panel, as I move around the image, will give me RGB and CMYK values. And I'm just going to pick a spot that's fairly easy to identify, this dark blue area right here on her pocket. And I'm getting roughly 4 and 12 or 13 and 26 or 27, somewhere around there in red, green, and blue. If I go to my eyedropper tool, it's important to switch this to 3x3 average for press quality images. Point sample is great for the web, but it may grab a random pixel and give you an inaccurate reading. In fact, if you have very high-res images, you can go to 5x5. But let's go to Edit, Assign Profile. Assign Profile would take this document if it was in something else, which it was. It was in sRGB. That's why you didn't see a change earlier. I've changed my Photoshop settings, so now other images I open will pick up the better Adobe RGB 1998, but this image has a saved profile in it. And again, that profile can change the color to control it on many different output devices and many different monitors and many different intended uses. So if I click the better working RGB of Adobe RGB 1998, you'll notice the image got a lot richer. So the default factory profile, kind of flat, kind of dull, the working RGB. And if I measure roughly the same spot, the tip of the eyedropper will measure it, I'm still getting fairly close, and the numbers, if I had marked it with an eyedropper, would be the same. So although it looks quite different on your screen, those numbers really are not changing. It's just to display it better. If I click OK, we actually have memory colors. We know grass is green. We know red objects, what they should look like a shiny red car. And for now, I'm going to use the embedded profile. If I don't want to change the color of somebody else's image, I'm just doing cleanup work on it, I would keep what they have. But if I'm accepting responsibility for the color, I'm going to convert it to my better working space. Edit, Assign Profile. And when I go, watch the sky when I do this. When I go from sRGB to working RGB, the sky, the car, everything gets a lot richer. Even on this image of the Palace of Fine Arts, I'll leave the embedded for now just to show you the switch, and I'll double click on Mini Bridge so it's not distracting, and I'll choose Edit, Assign Profile, and Adobe RGB 1998. Finally, when we do measure color, typically they grab a collection of images with grass, with sky, with skin tones, and a grayscale image. Even in the grayscale, because this is just an RGB that I've converted to grayscale by desaturating in Camera Raw, I could choose Edit, Assign Profile, and watch the detail under the roof here. Adobe RGB, see how everything richened up? The shadows just get more pronounced. Now I should mention, if you work in RGB the whole time, you still want to make accurate predictions to what it will look like when it's finally printed, so you can actually view proof colors. Proof colors, when you view them, show you what it will look like when it goes to CMYK Press. View, Proof Colors. And there you see a little bit of shift in the water. In fact, I'll hit Command Y or Control Y to see before and after. So some of your bright, vibrant shades will be lost, just to give you a more accurate representation of what 4-color printing can do. Same here on the red car. View, Proof Colors. And just a subtle shift in the shadow there as I hit Command Y or Control Y, and a little shift in the car. And I would do the same on the last image. Now, if I really do want to commit this and I want it to be final CMYK for what I'm seeing, I could do Image Mode CMYK, and it's telling us that it's using the web coded. This is what I intend, so I'm going to leave it and click OK. And now I see that this is CMYK here in the title bar. The second way to do that, if I undo, would be to do Edit, Convert to Profile. Edit, Convert to Profile can actually show me a preview before I commit to it. And I hit Command 0 or Control 0 to fit in window. So I could switch between US Sheet Fed Coded or US Web Coded, which carries a little less ink. So as I switch back and forth, you'll again see a subtle shift in the colors in the background. And I actually think the shadow's getting a little bit too blue on the US Web Coded, but I'd have to measure my color values. So if I left this and clicked OK, this is also CMYK. It's been converted. I'm committed to my color settings. I cannot repurpose this and get as bright, vibrant colors on the web or for print on demand. So I'm going to undo that, and I usually leave it in RGB as long as possible. About 40% of the printers in North America may still force you to do CMYK on every individual image. But the printers that have experimented and tested and color managed their own environment are fine. About 60% of them, just in my own personal surveying and travels are fine with you sending RGB and leaving it there as long as possible, because InDesign does a beautiful job of the RGB to CMYK conversions, and even some of the high-end RIPs that are out there, the raster image processors, the brains of the plate makers and image setters for making film for the printing press to make plates for the printing press, they do great conversions, where 10 years ago that didn't happen. So let's finish this off by going to File, Browse in Bridge, and when I do File, Browse in Bridge, I'll choose Edit, Creative Suite Color Settings. This way, all the applications in the Creative Suite will be synchronized and display color the same and print color the same. So I'm going to choose North America Prepress 2. I'll hit Apply. I will come back to Photoshop, and I will check Edit, Color Settings, and I will see it says synchronized and everything is North America Prepress 2. Now the last thing I'll do to get these profiles to be stored in the images is I will do a Save As. And on this car, I would never want to save as a JPEG twice, because it will recompress that JPEG and trash more data, affecting the quality. So I'm going to save this as Red Car End, and the preferred print formats are Photoshop. Native PSD works beautifully in InDesign or into Illustrator. And Photoshop will carry RGB, CMYK, even duotones, a black and a Pantone color. Line art or bitmap, which would be solid black and solid white only, which you can convert images to under Image Mode and choose bitmap. You have to go to grayscale in between to get there. So Photoshop is the first. TIFF is the second. TIFF is one we've been using for years and years, and TIFF will actually do internal LZW compression. And in case you're curious, LZW stands for Lempel, Ziv, and Welch, the guys who invented the compression ratio technique. But it is a lossless way to save data. It doesn't ever permanently trash the information. It just makes it a bit smaller by removing similar color values, plotting their coordinates, and putting them back in when you print. JPEG is also fine if you're going into InDesign or into Illustrator for print, but not saving JPEG twice because it affects quality. So even though JPEG started out as more of a web format, a lot of people are using raw camera images that are shot in JPEG, things that come from the Associated Press and so on, and that's what they're putting in their layout. But if you've already got a JPEG to start, you don't want to save a second JPEG of it. Convert it to something else like TIFF with compression if you want it smaller, or PSD. EPS is also alright, but EPS doesn't support transparency and may introduce some output problems in InDesign if you mix it with transparency effects like soft feather drop shadows or Pantone colors in the background. So EPS, although it was one of the standards for more than 20 years, is really being moved away from, and we're going towards PSD, Native Photoshop Document, TIFF, and if you do an image with type in Photoshop, Photoshop PDF in the Save As dialog here will keep your text as vectors or sharp and crisp instead of turning your text into pixels. So for the print world, those are the formats you would come across, and I've already saved this, so I'm going to hit cancel. This is already a PSD, and I've assigned the profile, so I can do a regular save to update it, and the same with the grayscale, just file save. So I hope this has lifted the veil a little bit about the color settings that are built into Photoshop. Remember, profiles can travel with the image and control what it will be when you output it, but don't permanently change it. Converting to profile does make a permanent change, and image mode CMYK does make a permanent change. So a lot of the industry is using the little assign profile to be able to have last-minute options to control that color or move that color if they need to, and still work with the widest gamut possible, the richest, best color you can get out of a photo. Thank you for listening, and I hope you picked up a couple of tips about color for prepress and print.